Hello, and welcome to FTT Chats. I'm Liz Lumley. This is where we sit down with some of the great and the good of fintech to have a little chat. So today I'm speaking to WillHackett, who seems to be outside in his garden. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, I thought maybe get a bit of greenery in. I've seen a few of the videos, and there's lots of sofas and houses and flats. So I thought I'd mix it up. Yours looks like you're sort of coming down from heaven or something.
I've got like the in America they call the Barbara Walters lighting, to make.
There's a touch of the divine about it.
So, the divine light. No, but I like the bird song very much.
Yeah, we've got like a little postage stamp of a terrace at the back of our flat. So for like 3 hours every day you get sunlight. So everything's outside at that point. So,
oh, cool.
So yeah, you have to forgive me if there's any birds tweeting or worse.
Well, awesome. Let's get away from talking gardens and we'll talk a bit about fintech. So I'm going to ask you my first question that I ask everyone, which is, who are you and what do you do?
That's a very good question. As you say, I'm Will, and I work at a company called Pangea, where we help B2B technology companies with their go-to-market. And that's predominantly across strategy, marketing, and sales, with a real focus on the execution of that. Prior, I worked in a similar vein in go-to-market for a banking software company, particularly in their cloud unit, which we grew out across Europe and Asia, and it was actually at a time when running critical banking systems, core banking systems on the cloud with millions of users was practically unheard of. So Microsoft, whose cloud we were using at the time, they really championed the work that we were doing and sort of turned it into this huge TV commercial telling the story. But it was actually so high budget that it ended up being run during the Super Bowl, which was was really cool. So that's my claim to fame. But after that, I took the well-trodden path into the startup scene, where I focused on the sales side and grew that company into Europe, Asia, and the US. So I've seen the ups and downs of bigger corporate and also the sort of the scale-up scene as well.
Those are good skills to have both sides of the coin. Yeah. So you help companies with go-to-market strategy and basically growth. So what are some of the top needs of a scaling company?
So it really varies. Assuming that the companies where we can best help is those who have found some level of product market fit, and then the common needs tend to be around market understanding. A reasonable hypothesis for that market, so they have a clear view on that target market, the clients, the personas, their ecosystem, how they differentiate themselves through value and brand and all of that good stuff. So they've got a good level of assessment and understanding there. And then you guys live and breathe this. Talent, access to people is super critical in order to be effective and credible. So you need to have those tier 1 girls and guys, and ideally have them people who are from the market, right? Because then that gives you the second really key need, which is access to the ecosystem. And so that's probably the top ones. And then more of my personal one is it's all around focus, right? And it's a relentless focus on both the cheap and quick wins, which are massively important for morale, as well as those larger strategic wins, which when combined create sort of critical mass. And we see these like sort of all these common factors, giving critical mass, which ultimately gives optionality, right? And critical mass doesn't have to be, more higher revenue. It comes in many forms, right? It can be logos, a number of logos or customers joining on. It can be the velocity at which the funnel grows, or it can be validation from a major influencer in the market, either working with you or talking about you. So I think it's about looking through the many lenses to be able to understand, what are the needs, and then to be able to tune into the best ones. I mean, there's actually an awesome talk by a guy called Gil Debner, who set up Angular Ventures. Sort of, he's an interesting guy in the VC space. But his talk he does looks at enterprise sales from an investor's perspective, which I think is also a really interesting angle for companies who are building out their businesses and ultimately eventually raising against them. I'd really recommend watching that video for quite a fresh perspective on growth.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk a little bit more about sort of this scaling points. A lot of people talk about the failure of startups, but the real danger point for new companies is after they get the product market fit and they start to grow and they start to scale. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen companies make when they're at that stage?
So that's really interesting point. Because more often than not, if you're a successful tech company, you find product market fit, you're going to be awesome in your home market, right? Unless it's a vast market like the US, the odds are that you're pretty well placed to take market share at that point. And where we see scale-ups facing a lot of challenges is around actually that new market entry. So there's a really good breakdown of international playbook that was put together by a guy called Rob Maffett from Balderton Capital. And what he found in sort of his analysis of it is that hugely successful tech companies, so these are companies that get to the $1 billion unicorn valuation, right? When they go international, right, and he analyzes the playbook, but he also looks at the timing, which I think is quite interesting. So for the US market, because obviously it's a bigger market, for fintech, they don't really tend to go international until they're into about 6 years. But on the European fintech, because we've got a slightly smaller market, it's around 3 and a bit years, which I found super interesting. So just that sort of gives you an idea of the level of speed at which European fintech companies have to grow at versus their American peers, who can really prove themselves out in their bigger market, right? So when we think through the lens of new market mistakes, I think the first big one is underestimating the time, effort, and cost that breaking into these new markets can take, right? There's an anecdote that's going around which says, take your worst case scenario for budget when you're going to a new market and treble it. So I think there are just so many unknowns. So anything that you can do to be better prepared and de-risk it is a worthwhile endeavor. But so another common mistake we see when you're going into those new markets is trying to do it all remotely, right?
Okay. Yeah.
In these times, we're all seeing the limits of virtual, right? Zoom and whatever tools you're using.
No, we're pro virtual now.
Are super powerful. But I think it's something that can help in those early stages when you're sounding out the market, when you're getting your first wins. But as soon as you're ready to commit, I think that fly in, fly out model stops working pretty quickly, because otherwise the local competition will always win, right? They'll have deep relationships, they understand the client paying better, and they'll have buy-in from broader based stakeholders. So it's really hard to beat that remotely. And more often than not, when you do snag or bag your first large client, they're going to demand that you have a local team to help them out. And that's usually quite an organic time to do it.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. I've seen that a lot. It's startups moving to a new region. They really need to have people who know that area very well. Those people on the ground. Yeah, no, I agree completely.
It's a really key part. And I think in that process of finding those people, coming back to the talent question, I think that's where it's hardest to make the right calls. And it's very common to see companies hire an extremely senior leader, like someone to come in and be the general manager as their first step. And while those people are wonderfully qualified and very specialist at their roles, more often than not, the main thing that we see is that they'll build out almost a separate company in that market, and they'll hire their people, which is great, and you want that sort of network effect from talent, but ultimately it creates a new company within a company, which can be really difficult to unwind. So that's probably a bigger issue, and what we see working on the flip side is actually when those resources are scarce and you really need to have a teaming mindset when going into new markets. So leverage all of your centralized resources. Have those guys who are at back at the farm at home base, have them buy into the international program so that they'll support through time zones that aren't comfortable. So, and then what we see in terms of building out the teams in those markets is actually to think of it more of like a tiger team, right? A minimum viable team. And their job is really to prove that market over years 1 and 2. And then once it's working, pour fuel on that fire, make it go as fast as you can once you've found the cogs that click together. And there's a really great case study actually that Go Cardless have done around how they think about their go-to-market, and it's very similar to that sort of minimal viable teams process. And so I'll share the links to all of these articles.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's great. Yeah,
talking about
include that in the post. I like that. I like that minimum viable team. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to steal that. Use it. So yeah. So my next question really is kind of maybe taking us away from that. I mean, a lot of the examples that you talked about are in the normal environment, and one of the reasons why you're here in your back garden with the birds and I'm here on the Arethville Plain is that, there's a global pandemic going on right now. Although, let me take a glass of water.
Yeah.
And everyone's working from home and they're having a new environment and companies are needing to pivot. All the points you made about growth and scaling right at the moment, is that kind of companies really just now focused on survival? Is that kind of put on a shelf right at the moment and they're just thinking survival mode right now?
It's a really difficult time to talk about growth when so many people's lives have been turned upside down. The worst case scenario when people are losing loved ones and jobs are being furloughed, worse. So I think striking that balance between survival and growth mindset is hard, really hard. And doing it in an emotionally empathetic way needs to be at the heart of everyone. For us, personally, to live through our lens, we're seeing a ton of early stage activity. So particularly investors who are doing a huge amount of diligence and research on companies, and we're working around that. And also then they're doing diligence on new markets for their portfolio, which is quite interesting. But like everyone, right, there's a huge slowdown in the deals that are being closed. So while there's a lot of stuff happening at the top in terms of growth, the actual material money and numbers aren't then converting and clicking through, which makes sense for the times that we're in, right? But I think what's interesting about the new order that we're living through is that accessibility to senior people and talent is probably better now than it's ever been.
That was kind of my next question.
Right.
I wanted to, what are there opportunities now that we can take advantage of? What's going to be the upside of the pandemic? Not to be crass about it.
No, but I think that's it, right? 6 weeks ago you were, almost a hope and a prayer to try and get hold of a C-level executive, right? Unless they knew you and they were involved already and they had buy-in. But now it's very viable, right? And I think that clearly, you talk about the opportunities. Clearly, there's attrition in the market, which, while brutal, in the long term is probably a good thing for the industry as it clears out a lot of the noise. So there's obvious opportunity around consolidation, right? Look at the open banking space. I think it's literally the last 4 weeks we've seen Eurobits and Strands both be acquired who are in that space, right? And ultimately, the mandate for digital channels is going to be driving more and more need for compliance and for anything that takes the friction out of those processes that are currently digitalized. So I think there's a ton of opportunity there, but I think that the biggest opportunity for tech companies more generally is for those that are able to pivot between a survival and a growth mindset quite quickly, so that they can take opportunities of those who are maybe stuck in one mindset and not the other. So that's very, very ethereal in line with your background. So I'll take it down, right? So the common theme right now is bunker down, survive the storm, stay internal. So if that is what your competition is doing, battening down the hatches and sitting tight, that is, right? There is literally never going to be a better time to get out there and get ahead of them. So, you know, take new markets, for example, right, which we talked about as a challenge earlier. On average, it takes around 12 months, maybe longer, to make that new market, you know, a success. So just in this example, right, if you can start that work now, do a lot of the heavy lifting during this period. So, you know, all that market assessment, finding the awesome people who are going to be your minimal viable team, and actually start seeding and building out that market, because, you know, now is the time to grow that top of funnel engagement, you know, grow awareness. Then when your competition finally does accept this is the new normal, you're going to be 6-9 months ahead of anyone else in that space. So I think the opportunity is in finding areas that you can invest in that others can't, and really double it down. So there's another great piece which I'll share is a company called NFX. They're a VC, and they look at this growth versus survival mindset, and they've got a framework of questions to ask yourselves as a business owner and a team lead and part of a scale up, to find those opportunities where your company should be double clicking. And I think that's where the biggest opportunity is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So my final question is really a personal question, because I hate asking questions that date interviews, but I don't like ignoring the elephant in the room. And we have mentioned COVID-19. You know, how are you dealing with that personally?
So personally, I'm extremely lucky. It's actually been good for me. I got engaged just before the lockdown. So it's been thank you. So it's been like a really good prelude to married life. And I've learned basic cooking skills. Like I now know how to make a roux, so I can make cauliflower cheese, macaroni and cheese. You can probably tell cheese is a big thing, right?
I made sourdough bread yesterday for the first time, and I'm very pleased with myself.
That's probably too advanced for me. But you know, on the family side, my family is thankfully healthy and safe, and unlike some of my friends and yourself, I don't have children yet. So
I have one. He's 15. So yeah,
homeschooling isn't something I've got to manage. So I'm in the luckiest of the lucky segment. And professionally, you know, while I'm loving opportunities like this, I do really miss the workplace. And my personal view is, one of the reasons that we're not seeing, you know, particularly just looking at my niche, right, the enterprise software world, one of the main reasons we're not seeing bigger deals going through from sort of start to finish is that it needs a huge level of trust, which you really can only build through face-to-face, right? So enterprise technology is more often than not is a multi-year long strategic investments, you know, and 10 years plus, right? So these often last longer than some marriages. Well, hopefully not mine, but yes. seriously, you wouldn't marry someone you've only spoken with over Zoom. Therefore, I don't know if you would go the whole 9 yards without that face-to-face interaction. But on the caveat, right, it's never been a better time to have that first conversation, which is often the hardest one to have. So, there's pros and cons in this new world, and it's a fun time to be experimenting and trying different ways to work.
Well, as always, thank you very much for sitting down for our chat, and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Liz. Stay safe too.